Thank you.
So welcome everyone. It is such a delight to be here. Thank you, Debbie, for the great introduction. And I really want to talk today about this very important topic, around resumes. Um, as Debbie mentioned, I am both a recruiter as well as a career coach. And I cannot tell you how many people come to me and say, I don't have the first clue. We're taught, by whoever teaches us way back, to just sort of put down our experience on a piece of paper. Some people say, oh, it shouldn't be more than 1 page or 2 page. Well, it should be job duties. It should be accomplishment stories. I don't know. I'm just going to kind of let her rip. Well, the reality is that your resume is not for you. Your resume is for the recruiter. Your resume is for the employer. And so what I want to do is I want to help you flip your mindset from this idea of, hey, let me just sort of list all of my experience. How do I transform my resume into a resume that is recruiter ready? A resume that attracts a recruiter, a resume that is designed for the eyes of a recruiter. At the end of the day, the recruiter is reading your resume because they want to know if you are a fit for their organization. While your job search is about your career goals, their search is about their business goals. And the resume is the document that lets them know if you are ready for that. So I want to sort of start by talking about this concept of who's scanning your resume. Notice I put scanning, not reading. Now, that is a very important distinction because a lot of people, when they write their resume, are thinking it's going to be read and they parse every word and, well, not this word, but that word. Meanwhile, it takes, no joke, 2.5 seconds for those eyeballs to scan down that page. Now, many years ago, there was a study that says it was 6 seconds. It's not 6 seconds. It's like about 2.5. And that is presuming that a person is reading your resumes. There are kind of two categories of people. There's people, and there's going to be computers, right? So when a person's reading your resume, there are three major kinds. You've got the recruiter. Let me just spend just a minute on this. What do I mean by recruiter? Well, there's corporate recruiters and there's headhunters. A corporate recruiter is somebody who works for an employer. They are a full-time paid employee. They're in a large company of over 200 employees, where there's enough volume of openings to hire a full-time person or multiple. And that person is doing lots and lots of searches from executives, lower level, everybody, right? And they are very busy people, and poor people, they hardly get the hiring manager's attention. It's a laborious process. I mean, God bless all the corporate recruiters out there. I don't know if I could do it. Very, very intense. And so those folks often, right, are going to be using, when we're going to get to there in a second, the applicant tracking system, which is a big database, which kind of collects, right, all of these resumes. We'll get there in a minute. But that's a corporate recruiter. A headhunter is different, and I happen to be one of those. And it's okay to call it a headhunter because the where it came from was the term hunting heads of companies. So that's okay, not a bounty hunter, it's a headhunter. And we are third party, right? So we are hired, by an employer, but we have lots of clients. So it's an employer, typically smaller, oftentimes, not always, who need the extra help, right? They just don't have the corporate recruiter. They don't have an HR person necessarily, so although some do. And they say, hey, we need you to do a specialized search for us, okay? So we work with lots of different companies. Also, a human resources professional who's very, very busy, maybe an HR generalist who's got lots on their plate. They're doing everything from payroll to compensation to benefits. Oh, and by the way, a little bit of recruiting. Extremely busy, hardly have time for recruiting. And so this is, by the way, also why your resume often goes into cyberspace, or at least it feels that way, because these folks are super busy and you are one of many, many candidates that they're screening, okay? And of course, the hiring manager themselves could be screening your resume. Oftentimes they're not doing the search, although in a very small company they might be, but at some point, the HR person or the recruiter is passing that resume along for that person to screen, okay? So I just want to set the context here. Then there's computers. Now, of course, people get involved with this, but I want to explain that there's really three different ways. Either a job board, which all of you are familiar with, Career Builder, Indeed, that kind of thing. When you apply through a job board, please know you are now competing with hundreds of other people. You are competing with hundreds of other people, especially these days in the era of remote work. Because once a job is fully remote, and Hyung can probably attest to this, now that employer can search for candidates all over the country. which means when that job goes on LinkedIn or goes on Indeed or goes on CareerBuilder, everybody's applying. And that's why it is so important, ready, here's the phrase, for you to show up before your resume. Now, tonight is not a presentation about networking, but it could have been, because frankly, that is the way that most people get jobs. I am talking about resumes tonight because we need to talk about resumes. It is the document that's going to shepherd your candidacy along at some point, whether it's through the job board or through a person referring you in. Either way, okay? But the point, though, is that ultimately, networking is typically how you are going to land this role because of the stiff competition. On top of which, next you have your applicant tracking system, the famous ATS. Large companies tend to use an ATS. Why? Because they can't handle the volume of resumes. If you've got multiple openings, 10, 20, 30 openings at one time or more, how do you handle thousands of resumes? You can't. So you have this database if you're a recruiter. Now, this database is a very funny thing because it relies on two things going on. It relies on the keywords that the recruiter puts into the database to go find your resume, but it also relies on your resume having the right keywords to be found. And most people don't understand that. And so one of the keys to having your resume noticed by an ATS, and there are lots of keys to it, one of them is to make sure that you comb through that job description line by line and word for word, especially in the qualifications section and in the responsibility section, the first few bullets of each, and look for the keywords that employer is using and make sure that they are showing up very well on your resume. And then I've got a slide later on that we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I wanted to give you the high level here that the applicant tracking system or large companies use to take your resume, that resume has got to be in a format and has got to say the right things in order for that employer, for that database, for that ATS to notice you. And of course, there's traditional email. I have to put that there because, if somebody's referring you, what they'll do, they'll just email your resume to somebody, and that's okay. And frankly, most people write their resumes for traditional email. Most people are not writing their resumes for the job board and for the ATS. They're assuming that somebody is going to take that resume, open it up, and spend a few minutes actually reading it. That's not the case. So your resume needs to be scannable, not just readable. And we're going to spend time tonight really talking through this. So this is just a high level that I've just given you, but we're going to go deep. Okay. So the next thing is, well, how do they receive it? Well, there's 4 ways. First of all, unsolicited. Now that's very rare. Most of you are not necessarily, although it's not a bad idea, going to go just cold into a company and say, hey, here's my brand. But some people do. And every once in a while it works. I was coaching somebody recently and he actually has a telemarketing background of all things. And I suggest, and he wasn't really getting traction because who hires a telemarketer, right? So he had his own little business, but it wasn't doing so well. I said, let's go to telemarketing companies who hire telemarketers, right? For their client. And he did a cold outreach. We did a whole laundry list and searching and found 30 different companies and boom, boom, boom. He sent emails and LinkedIn up. Sure enough, got a job, right? He went in the front door and he was cold, but guess what? It was the road less traveled because he wasn't competing with anybody. So it can happen if it's unsolicited. Job postings, of course, are typically how people get their jobs. But like I said, that's how people often apply, but that's not actually how people get jobs. People get jobs often from networking, but it is the traditional route. The third one is solicited from you, meaning where somebody recruits you. A lot of people on this call probably have had that happen at least once in their life. A friend calls, a colleague calls, an old boss calls, a recruiter randomly reaches out to you on LinkedIn. I do that to people all the time. Hey, I think you'd be a good fit for this job. If they are soliciting you, your resume is much less important. It's important to an extent, but much less important because oftentimes you're being solicited, you're being recruited based on your reputation, not based on your resume. Okay? Somebody knows of you, they trust you, they've heard about you, your work. They go, oh, Debbie, she'd be great for this. Let's call her. Okay. Even your LinkedIn profile. If a recruiter like me is reaching out on LinkedIn, and by the way, I don't mean LinkedIn's job board. That's different. LinkedIn has a job board that most of you are familiar with. I'm talking about LinkedIn's database. The upper left-hand corner of LinkedIn, that search bar that is kind of hidden in plain sight, people don't even realize it's there. That is a massive database. It contains all the profiles of anybody on LinkedIn. Not to say you can access all of them because you have to be first, second, or third level connected to those people for them to show up. But that is the database that people use. I mention that because as a recruiter, when I'm reaching out to somebody, I'm using the person's LinkedIn profile to vet them, not their resume. But guess what? Guess what the second half of a LinkedIn profile is? The experience section. What's the experience section? Your resume. The more detailed that can be, the more fleshed out, the easier it is for me to say yes. The more your about section speaks to who you are, what you want to do, how you do it, speaks to the urgent problems you solve, the more likely it is I'm going to get to know you and say, oh, this is somebody that I want to see. The headline, right? If the headline has the keywords that relate to the profession that you're in or the industry that you're looking for, that LinkedIn profile is huge because we recruiters are using it all the time. All the time. In fact, 97% of recruiters use LinkedIn for their searching, and many of them, 2/3 at least, use LinkedIn exclusively, and also other sources on the internet, not job boards. And I will tell you something else, hot off the press. Indeed has made it extremely expensive for employers to actually post their jobs now. So people like me, I'm getting off of Indeed completely. It's very, very unrealistically expensive. LinkedIn's also kind of getting there, but it's a little more reasonable. The point, though, is that there aren't going to be as many jobs on these job boards anymore. So you need to have a LinkedIn profile. Again, we're not talking about that tonight. That could be a separate meeting. But you need to have a LinkedIn profile that is scannable, that is searchable, right? Where the right keywords are there. Debbie, would it be okay if we admitted Karen? Okay. So let's keep going. The fourth one is referred, meaning that you are referred to the employer, right? That is the networking that I'm talking about, right? Where somebody's referring you either because they just know you and they're like, hey, Deb, I just think that Debbie would agree for this job. Or you hear about an opportunity and you proactively find, typically through LinkedIn, right? You find out who the hiring manager is or the HR person or the CEO. And maybe hopefully that person's second level to you, and then you have a mutual first level connection. And you tap that first level person and you say, hey, Susie, I noticed that, John is the CEO or the hiring manager. Would you consider sending my resume to them for extra consideration? Even once you've applied the normal channels. After that, you can leverage that relationship and you can have them as a champion. So then somebody's referring you. And typically when these bottom two sections, either somebody's soliciting your resume or somebody's referring your resume, that's where your resume is, again, less important because there's a referral there. There's a person who's somehow connected to you, either knows you or referring you. And then you're showing up before your resume. So your resume is less important as a document. But certainly if it's unsolicited and certainly if it's a job posting and they've never met you, they don't know anything about you and you're just a piece of paper, that resume is going to be extremely important. Okay. So what are they scanning for? 3 things. Number 1, your ability to do the job with a minimal learning curve. What do I mean by that? This employer has taken time, hopefully, to think through the skill sets that it's going to take to do an excellent job. The skill sets it's going to take for there to be a minimal learning curve. Skill sets it's going to take for you to excel. And they are scanning your resume for those key skills to see at a basic level, does this person have the requisite skills to slide into the job? They're looking for those skills. They're also looking for your ability to understand their culture and constituents. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, ability to understand their culture. They don't know me on a piece of paper. How can they know my culture? Well, they can't on the resume, but here's what they can do in terms of culture. I don't just mean your personality. That they'll figure out in the interview. What I mean by cultural fit actually has to do with the industry or the sector that you come from. And I'd like to give you a very live example. Today, I was talking to a coaching client. She's an old coaching client. And she found a job. Now, let me explain the situation. She had come from the nonprofit sector. And she was in an association. She worked with committees and a medical society and all of this. She gets a job with a pharma company. Already, I think you might be able to see where I'm going with this. Nonprofit, landed a job with a for-profit pharma company. And within a year now, she's on probation and she's going to be losing her job pretty soon. And she's not a good fit for her either. Like, she doesn't like them. They don't like her. Like, it's not a good. Why? Because she said to me, it was a cultural mismatch. She was not expecting them to be so focused on profit. That's what corporations do. They're very focused on profit and revenue. Nonprofits are not. by and large. It's not that they don't have need to make money. Nonprofits need to make money. They have to generate revenue, but their mission focus, the culture was completely different, and she wasn't prepared for it. And oftentimes that happens the other way. A corporate person will go into a nonprofit and go, whoa, it's slow, and the politics and committees and all, it's like molasses. Very different pace. So culturally, they might be looking at your resume and saying, oh, this person came from whatever it is, government, for-profit, nonprofit, small company, large company, different kinds of companies have different cultures. Amazon, for example, is a very unique culture. And some people know that, and they might look at your background and say, oh, they came from Amazon. That must mean, they make all kinds of assumptions. There's just something to watch for. And when I say I'll understand their constituents, I mean constituents broadly, members, customers, clients, right? Whatever. And so what'll, again, same thing. They'll say, oh, do they get the kind of people that we serve? Do they understand how to relate to those people? Same thing. You're in a nonprofit, you're dealing with members. Very different relationship than when you're dealing with for-profit customers and clients, and employers get that. So I'm not suggesting that by and large, they're going to completely screen you out if you come from a completely different sector, but they might. And if you want to, and if you realize that you're going to be making an industry shift, it's going to be extremely important for you to really focus on your skill set, because there's basically two sides to your candidacy, what I call your lane and your community. Your lane and your community. Your lane is what you do, your community is who you do it for. So your lane is your profession. You're an accountant, you're an HR person, you're a marketer, whatever you are. Your community is the industry, mission, or sector. If you are trying to shift to a different community, you want to make sure that your lane skills line up with the job. It is very, very, very difficult to change both your lane and your community, because employers don't feel very safe when you do that, because they don't think that there's going to be a minimal learning curve. They think there's going to be a huge learning curve on all these levels, both from a skill set and ability to understand culture, constituents, all of that. And the third thing is your track record of stable employment, which I know is rare these days, right? A lot of people make a lot of moves, okay? So I'm not saying that this is all the time, but in general, employers do have a bit of a lens for that, because they're going to be investing time and resources into training or whatever. They want you to be there for a while. So they, rightly or wrongly, assume that the length of tenure that you've had in the past could be an indication of how long you're going to be there in the future. Not always. And again, you have all kinds of interesting stories. And it's not that if you have short-lived tenure that you're not going to get a job. Of course not, because people understand. But there can be this lens. So if you had some shorter tenures, you could actually on your resume, once in a while, I've seen people do this, actually put reason for leaving, just in small print, right underneath the date, just to indicate to an employer, look, I had a legitimate reason for leave. The company closed, I relocated, whatever, there's a merger, anything like that. You can put that in just a few words. And if you have spotty tenure, that can assuage an employer. Bottom line, your resume is about the employer's need to find a competent employee. That is why they're looking at your resume. You are looking for a good career fit, as well you should be. They are looking for a competent employee to fulfill their business goals. So when you do your resume, if you can keep that lens, the employer's lens on your resume, that can help tremendously. We're going to talk a little bit in a little bit about customizing your resume. Hugely important. Huge, 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 huge. You do not want to have one standard resume that goes to everybody. Please hear me. If you hear nothing else tonight, please know that you should not have one. And I don't mean just having 2 or 3 versions of your resume. No. I mean literally customizing your resume for every single job. And you're like, but sure, that's so hard. It's worth it. Trust me. Because if it is a job that you are really interested in, and that employer does that 2-second scan, they're going to be looking for those keywords, and you've got to catch their attention in a New York minute. And the analogy that I like to give is when you're driving 65 miles down the highway and you see a little billboard from McDonald's. McDonald's is not putting on their billboard all the ingredients of their French fries. Nope. What are they doing these days? Because everybody's into wellness. They're showing a potato, right? And a big farm, right? It's, oh, a potato. Didn't you know French fries are actually healthy for you? They have a potato and then the French fries, because they're trying to, it's a quick image. They know they literally have you for a nanosecond to get that image. And it's the same thing with your resume. Your resume is an advertising document. People are flying by 65 miles down the highway, scanning your resume to see, do I see the potato? Is there a potato on this resume? To see, is there actually going to be a quick match? That's how fast it goes. Okay. By the way, that doesn't mean to say you can't have detail on your resume, but I'll show you a way to do it where you can have the keywords that are scannable and still give some depth. Okay, so stay tuned for that. All right, next, what's driving their decision? 2 words: risk aversion. I think you've picked that up from me so far. These folks are risk averse. For all intents and purposes, wherever possible, they want an exact alignment of your skills and your industry with the job description, where possible. That's mostly their goal. With rare exception, there absolutely are employers that are actually looking for someone outside the field because they're looking for a fresh perspective. Very, very rare. It does happen though. Mostly, they want the minimal learning curve because they don't have time to train and they want you to slide into home base. So your question asking, well, can I make a career change? Yes, you can, with a lot of intention, right? It's not just simply saying, hey, I decided that I've been working in corporate America and I want to go work for an environmental nonprofit. Aren't they going to hire me? I want you to walk a mile in the employer's shoes. I want really try this on for size. Right now, you are a hiring manager at an environmental nonprofit, and you're looking for a policy analyst. Let's just say that, okay? In fact, I'd like people to open up your mic. What do you think you're going to be looking for? Just throw something out. Skills, industry, whatever. What do you think? If you're a hiring manager and you can hire one person for this role, we're going to call it a policy analyst or make up any job, doesn't matter. For an environmental nonprofit, what do you think you're going to be looking for as an employer? Just open up your mic.
A resume that says analyst.
Yes, great. Keep going. What else?
And environment.
Yes, precisely. Precisely. Those 2 things. That's the employer's lens. If your resume does not say that, will they consider you? Likely not. However, here's the 1, 2, 3, okay, of how you can make this happen. First of all, especially if you're shifting to a new sector, and even if you're shifting to a new profession, but especially a sector, you want to demonstrate to that community that you're committed to their mission. And I am going to stick with the environmental thing because that is over the last, 10 years or so, I have seen more, for obvious reasons, right? I've seen more and more people want to shift into that particular sector, and not just the environment, but things that have to do with, serving people, serving underserved, and right. A lot of people want to make an impact, right? They want to work for a mission-driven organization. Very, 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 very common these days. Wonderful. But a lot of those organizations, those nonprofits, are like, yeah, but we're still a business, and we're still risk averse, and we still want you to have a nonprofit background. And not just a nonprofit background, we want you to have an environmental nonprofit background. Or, I'm about to, Lord willing, get a search tomorrow for an executive director search for a local nonprofit in the DC area that serves underserved youth, specifically more along Black and Brown children. And they, as a recruiter, they wanted to know that I have had experience placing individuals who are from that type of, diverse community. Like as a recruiter, not even the candidate yet. They just want to know that I have experience that I can relate to their mission, okay? And that's because employers are risk averse. They really want to know that you have this commitment. So what do you do in step number 1 here? Let's just say you want to go into the environmental sector. And I actually have a real live example of this. You can go and find organizations, networking groups, associations, thought leadership channels on LinkedIn, right? And other places where you can start plugging into that community. So I had it happen. I had a career coaching client once, Jennifer, who came from corporate, and she had this passion for the ocean and for the problems with the ocean. She was just really into that. Anyway, so she's like, how do I change? Right. So what did we do? We found that there was an opportunity. It happened to be an executive assistant. She was a project manager before. Found an executive assistant job with the head of, I won't say the name of it, but just say a major environmental organization. We just completely customized her resume. We first of all, on the lane, we uplifted her administrative skills, downplayed her project management. We didn't want her to be overqualified. And number 2, we highlighted the little areas that she had already started to plug into that community. I think she volunteered for like a sustainability farm or something like that. There was a couple little things that she did just in her volunteer world. And we put it right up top and we said environmental related experience, like 2 different things. It wasn't a big deal. I think she did some research for somebody or whatever. She plugged in. She also networked. She found an organization called WESE in the DC area, Women in Conservation, Energy, and the Environment, something like that. Plugged in there, started networking. I mean, just really dove in. And she got the job. Like we just did this whole, she got hired. And now she's been able to actually make a career path in this sector, okay? You've got to do it with a lot of intention. You cannot just send your resume and expect that a risk-averse employer is going to say, oh, great, just because they're interested in us, that necessarily means they're qualified. No, it's great to have the passion, but again, they are risk-averse. They need to know you can do the job. So that's step number 1. Number 2, highlighting your relevant skills throughout your resume. So let me give you another example. And actually, right after the slide, I'm going to show you specifically the example. Where if you are looking to stay in the same community but shift your lane, what you can do is you can actually find the experience that you've had throughout your resume where you've demonstrated those skills and repurpose them. And I'm going to actually go to step 3 and then share with you the example, so kind of to pull together. And it's what I call the ing versus concept. What does that mean? So ing is the skill, is the profession. Writing versus writer. Event planning, event planner. Most of us have a whole bunch of ing skills in our background. Call it ing, call it end, like project management, whatever you want to call it, but they're just skills. Project management, project manager, right? So I'm going to give you a story of a woman who a coaching client I work with. She worked for an association, okay, and she was in their government relations area, okay, worked with the PAC and lobbyists and all this stuff. She decided that she wanted to go into operations. Wait, what? Oh, okay, government relations operating. How do you? Well, this is what we did. We took her resume. I'm about to show this to you. And we found all of the skills and the accomplishment stories that had to do with operational skills. And we, of course, couldn't change the title. We couldn't change her company, but we could modify her accomplishment stories. And this is what it looks like. Okay, I've hit her name. So we basically called her, right, an operations-minded association leader. And then we focused technology, staff, budget, fundraising, processes. These were real stories that we found that were in her background, and we pulled them out and we labeled them. And we did this for the whole resume. This is just the first page, okay? Then she went and she started networking, and she had a little pitch, and she explained to the people in her association community, guess what? I'm shifting from this lobbying PAC world. I want to go into associations. And she got a job. And she got a job actually heading a little foundation. One of those big associations had a little foundation. It's an operations role where she gets to be the person kind of just run the administration for this foundation, okay? But that was because we were very, very intentional. Had her resume, so we have legislative advocacy here because she's like, yeah, we'll just sort of mention it, right? It's okay, because she was okay working in that environment, but she didn't want to actually be, right, a legislative professional. She wanted to be an operations person. So everything we did focused in. And so the whole resume felt like an operations resume. Okay. All right. And I'm going to give you other examples too. So what are employers focused on in your resume? Like I said earlier, a resume that's tailored to the posting. So I'm going to give you some tips now. First of all, I want to encourage you to create a branded master resume, again, that is customizable. Now, when I say branded, it's just like the one that I just showed you. Did you notice at the top, it said operations-minded association leader? We couldn't call her an operations professional because she wasn't one, but she was operations-minded. She's an association leader. We turned it into an adjective, okay? We said she's sort of esque, operations-esque kind of a person. It branded her. All the keywords were branded. So we took this and we created this master resume. That's the resume she was able to network with. However, if there was a specific job, what she could do is she could customize the labels. Now, just remember, it said technology modernization, process improvement. Those are the customizable labels. She could customize the heading if she wanted to. Okay, she could do these things to fit a specific job if she needed to. So there's something that's branded that you can send to your colleagues, but it's tweakable. She wouldn't have even necessarily had to change the accomplishment stories. Why? Because every time you have an accomplishment story, and notice I did not say a job duty, accomplishment story. If you have an accomplishment story, typically you have a whole bunch of skills that are hidden within that story. What we did on that resume is we pulled out a label. So we used to call bullet number 1, we called that technology monitors. We could have called that 100 different things. Okay. We focused on technology because we thought, okay, that's one kind of operational skill. But had she not been going after operations, notice there is PAC and advocacy there. We could have labeled it PAC or advocacy. We mentioned it directing an RFP process. Okay, so maybe we could have had something about vendors, whatever. The point is that there are hidden skills in here that if you are looking at a specific job, you can pull out a skill and say, all right, let me just relabel the story to whatever the employer is looking for. Next, read. Don't scan. Read the job posting. Well, most job seekers, so where a recruiter takes like 2.5 seconds to read a resume, normally for most job seekers is no more than about 60 seconds, if that, maybe 30 seconds, okay, to read a job posting. I don't know if you're going to shake your head or not at that, but if that's true for you, but for most people, why? Because you're looking at a job posting, you've seen 100 of these things. They all kind of look, you're looking for a customer service manager, you've seen 100 customer service manager jobs, right? It all kind of looks the same, but it's not all the same because that employer is focusing on some very specific skills. So read the summary section very well. What are they really trying to accomplish in this job? What are some of the keywords that they're using to describe that? Look at the first few bullets of the responsibilities, the first few bullets of qualifications. Not all 15 is, you can read all 15, but it's not the 15th bullet that says other duties as assigned, obviously is not the one you need to focus on, right? The first few bullets is where the action is. The first few bullets indicates to you that's what the employer deems as most important for this job. I'm letting that hang in the air so you get it. That's what they deem as most important for this job. The first 3, maybe 4 bullets. And they're going to use some very specific keywords in those bullets. Those are the words that you want to find in your labels and then the text box, and right. That's what you need to be looking at. It's not just generic, oh, let me just look up customer service skills. And by the way, for those of you who are in anything having to do with the technology world, even more important, because those are the skills, that's tech recruiters, they zero in on your technical skills. Those technical skills have got to be big, broad, and broadcast, bolded all over at the top of your resume. That's what they want to see. Do you have C++? Do you have Java? Do you have whatever? That's what they need to know. So it's all about that resume. It's all about the job description. Next, the headline. So again, showed you the one that said operations-minded association leader. Had she, whatever the job was, she could have changed that, right, to something else. Your career headline has to align with it. Now, I'm not saying if the job title is director of marketing, and that's not been, your complete focus, that you can say director of marketing, but you could say, again, marketing oriented or marketing minded or that kind of thing. But if you do have the background that actually aligns with the job, make sure to use the keywords in the job title in your career headline. And I really do believe in the career headline because, again, it frames up this advertising document. It's the first thing that people are going to look for. Just to say, this is who this person believes that they are, this is their career, and then they're assuming that the rest of the resume is going to back that up. So they're assuming if you said that that's the career that you want and that's the job title that we have, we already have a match. And the rest of it is just demonstrating it. And then the keywords, right? Again, your job competencies and your specialized skills, those are the keywords that the employer is looking for. Again, go through that job description. I cannot emphasize this to you enough. Most people don't take the time to do this because they don't think they need to. They think that their resume is just going to kind of, speak for itself, and it doesn't, because just like you've seen 100 customer service manager jobs, they've seen 100 resumes, and all those resumes look similar too. Well, at least the ones that are qualified. I will tell you that many employers get resumes that have no business being in their inbox because they're not qualified for the role at all, at level, skills, or anything. And so they have to kind of weed people out. But for the folks who actually are qualified, they've seen a lot of those. How do they narrow down from the 50 to the 20 to the 10 to the 5 to the 1? Well, one of the ways they do that is to say, does this person actually spell out the competencies that we're looking for? And relevant employment history. Backing up to the community thing. Does the person have industry experience or similar employers to the ones that the one that they are, right? Again, if you come from a different community, that's okay, which that just means that your lane needs to be that much more showcased. Or like in the case of my client, if you have any sort of connection to that industry, whether it's volunteer experience or experience you had a long time ago, or even just a passion for it, somehow you want to indicate that at the top of your resume, because there has to be a hook. There has to be some reason why they need to consider you. Remember, they're risk averse, minimal learning curve. You've got to make it easy for them to say yes. And as I mentioned, reasonable job tenure, okay? And yeah, I appreciate that people have all kinds of things going on in their life. By the way, you should know that LinkedIn has done a very gracious thing for job seekers. There is now a button that you can click that indicates something called a career break. Okay, so when you're going into your experience section, and I would stop this and actually show it to you. The words I'm going to mess up the flow, but I'll just explain it to you verbally. If you go to your LinkedIn profile, you go to the experience section, there's a little plus sign right at the top of that box. You click on the plus sign, and now there's a drop down. You can add a position, but you can also add a career break. And if you click on add a career break on the next page, there's a drop down. And it says, what kind of career break did you have? And there's like 10 different things, everything from bereavement to job transition to care for parent, whatever, family, all kinds of things, sabbatical, a lot of things. So you can click on that, and on your LinkedIn profile, it can actually show that you've had a career break. Okay. In fact, I have later on, I have a resume that I think I put it in here to show you that I have a client who cared for his elderly father twice while his father was in ill health, and literally took out, I think, a year or two at a time. And we actually said on his resume, elder care, and put a one-liner in it to explain that this is what he was doing during that time to account for his gap. So there are ways to do that. And by the way, if it's your own health that was the reason for you being absent, of course, for discrimination purposes, you do not want to indicate that, but you could say family sabbatical or family care, because you are your own family, right? And just say cared for ill family member during this time. That's perfectly fine. Just please, I would recommend not to share your own situation. You don't want any cause for discrimination, but you can, there are creative ways to indicate that you've had a career break. Okay, so not only should the resume be tailored, it needs to be scannable. Now, ATS. So I put here on this slide 3 different links. And I'd like to encourage you to take a screenshot. I realize if you take a screenshot, this is not clickable, but I'm happy to send this resume to Debbie if there's a way to get this posted. But either way, please click this. If you just want to Google search getting resume through ATS, you will see a ton of articles, these included. And rather than going through all of these great tips, I actually want to commend you to go here and read them. They said it much better than I ever could. But it is very, very important to think through how to have a resume that is ATS friendly. And there are all kinds of tips, everything from, again, they'll also talk to you about putting the right keywords in. They also talk about formatting. ATSs are not very friendly to fancy formatting. For example, they're not favorable to text boxes. You want to take, and I'm a text box girl. Okay, you'll see my resumes always have them. Take it out. Okay, bullets are fine. Text boxes are not. The border that I always put around, don't do a border. Okay, because what happens is the ATS actually, the first bullet here, the first article, I think it's the first one, shows a real example of your resume, how it looks when it comes out on the other side of the ATS. It turns it into plain text. It turns it into plain text. All that fancy formatting goes out the window, but more importantly, the ATS can't even read it. So it'll often garble your content. It'll garble your resume. So you've got to put it in a format that is actually readable, scannable by the ATS, because when the recruiter pops those keywords in, they need to show up in your resume. Okay. So I commend these articles. And then the third one is actually not an article as much. That's actually JobScan, which is an ATS resume scanner. You can put your resume and the job description in that free link, and it'll compare it for you. It'll tell you how much of a match it is. Okay, so I just really want you to take advantage of this and share the screen. Okay, that's great. Do a screenshot. Next, eliminate the objective and the summary. Okay, I'm one of those resume writers, and I am, by the way. I mentioned I'm a coach, but I'm a resume writer. I'm a LinkedIn profile creator. Okay, I do not believe in these anymore, and the reason is it's wasted real estate. That's just what it is, because everybody scans, right? They're not reading an objective statement. They're not reading a paragraph summary statement anymore. They're going straight for the guts. Where did you work? What was your title? Where's the keywords? Boom, boom, boom. 2 seconds. Okay, that's what they're looking for. They're not taking the time. They don't have the time to read it. So I would eliminate it. And all you need to do is have that career title, because the career title essentially says what your objective and summary are trying to say in like 3 or 4 words. By saying, this is my career, you're saying, this is where I'm going. And you don't have to make a whole long paragraph about it. You can talk about your background in your interview, absolutely. But for the purposes of a resume, it's got to be streamlined and scannable. So the next thing is labeling accomplishment stories. There are different formulas, okay, for how to write an accomplishment story and how to speak an accomplishment story. Few of the ones that people use are STAR, situation, action, result, STAR, situation, task, action, result, or CAB, which I happen to like, challenge, action, benefit. It's all the same stuff. It's a story, right? But you got to take that story and turn it into a bullet. Happens to be one of the things that I do for my clients. But if you're doing this on your own, what you want to do is you want to make it no more than about 3 or 4 lines. Okay. And you actually can have that long of a story if you label it with one of those labels, like I showed you a few minutes ago. Okay. Because the real estate there says, okay, there's a solid story here where I developed something, I spearheaded something, there was some kind of results right in there, but I'm labeling it with a skill, a scannable skill, to let you know that you're about to read a story about technology modernization. It's the same thing as when you go to a website. A good website, of course, is not going to have tons and tons of text. We're not in, 1992 anymore, okay? What do they have? Icons, or the little keyword that you want to click on. If you want to learn more, you click on About Us or Services or whatever it is. It's one word, and it directs you to the thing that you are looking for. Then when you go to the next page, oh, okay, I've taken the time to click on it because I'm interested. That's what the label does. The label is that little icon that says, you want to learn more about my technology modernization? Here you go. Here's an accomplishment story. You can read more, but you don't have to. You can skip down to the next one really fast. But the bolded labels allow the eye to just scan. And again, customize it to the job. All right. Now I'm going to give you befores and afters. All right. I'm going to give you 3 different sets of these. Now, as I mentioned, I am a resume writer, and you're going to see the same kind of format for all of them, but it's the stories that are kind of interesting. All right. So, or I should say, what it looked like when they started working with me, and then what it turned into afterwards. And these are very normal resumes. Yes, they are real resumes. Yes, I've completely sanitized them. There should be no reference to who the person actually is, but they should feel very familiar to you. All right. And as I do these, I am going to ask you to open your mic, and I want you to be a recruiter. And I want you to tell me what you think about these resumes. Okay. There's going to be a couple slides. So here's the first one. Okay. We're going to call this woman Sally. So here is page 1. Okay. And here's page 2. Now, I want you to just open your mic. Tell me very quick. So 2 seconds. I'm not asking you to do a deep dive. You're a recruiter now. You just seen it in 2 seconds. Tell me what you like and tell me what you don't. I understand you don't have a job right now that you're comparing it to, but just overall, what do you like? What do you not?
I don't like the layout.
Okay. Why not?
Because it's difficult to read. I'd like to just be able to go down and go boom, 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 rather than go back, go forth, you know?
Yeah. And there are a lot of people, Debbie, who are using resumes like this. These are there are templates that look like this. In fact, graphic designers, actually, even creative people will often use this because it looks pretty, but you're absolutely right. The eye does not naturally want to go down 2 columns. The eye wants to go back and forth. That's great. Any other feedback?
And there's a lot of wasted real estate because of that, even at the top, because of that split
Yeah,
that whole top right is,
right. Wasted. That's right. That's right. What else? What are we?
I mean,
what are
I think it's also confusing. It's like, where do I go? Where do I start?
Yeah.
What do I do?
yeah, that's right. That's right. What else? There's more here.
Sharon, then the other thing you mentioned is ATS friendly in the text boxes.
Yep. Not ATF friendly. Keep going. What else are we missing?
I've heard that you're not really supposed to use your address anymore. Is that correct?
Oh, that's true. Absolutely. That's a whole other thing. That's a cybersecurity thing. Yeah, I don't put addresses on my resumes because you never know whose hands it's going to get into. In fact, these days you don't even really have to put city state, especially because of the remote thing. You can if you want to, but it can be limiting. If you put city state and it's a different state and someone's like, well, it could screen you out unnecessarily because you might be willing to relocate or it might be a remote work. But at the very least, no address. That's a good point, Wes. Thanks. What about the descriptions underneath each job? What do you think of that?
I would do bullets because I'm not going to have time to hunt for, I know there are figures in there, but
You think it's enough information for an employer to make a good decision?
I don't know. It depends on, what, sometimes don't you want to let people know if you work for an organization or a company that may not be well known or the name may be misleading? Don't you want to put some little something under there to tell them what it was?
Sometimes that actually is very appropriate. You don't always have to do that, but you're right. There are a lot of times people work for companies that are unknown. What you can do is you can have the name of the company and then in italics right underneath it, a one-liner about what that company does. You can, especially if you really feel the need to explain it. But for some people, it doesn't matter. And the reason is that if you are, I'll call a cross-community person, cross-sectoral, person, where your industry really doesn't matter that much, what you can do is you can say to yourself, well, look, I've been cross-sectoral. I've worked with all kinds of industries. What I really want to showcase is my lane. And if all you're showcasing is your lane, I'm an accountant, I'm a marketing person, I'm an HR, most often employers are going to fixate on that and then maybe ask you what the company did, unless it's a very specialized industry where you're trying to shift into, right? Then yeah, you may want to have some explanations. But to your point, though, you can. There's nothing wrong with it. You could do that for every resume if you like. It adds a little bit of extra real estate, but it is certainly is possible. What about?
I just wonder.
Yeah, for sure. What about accomplishment stories? Do you see any of those here?
Well, it did say increase membership by 7%.
Yeah, you say we have a metric, but are there stories? Do I know really the substance of what she did as an executive director? No, I know 4 lines. I know 2.5 lines that says generally what she did, and then 1 metric. That's all I say. Okay. This particular format does not allow for any sort of rich explanation. Okay. So I wanted to show you how we changed it. Ready? Here she is. And you're going to see here that we fleshed this puppy out.
Barrier.
We fleshed it out. These are decent accomplishment stories that actually are keyword labeled and are customizable. This is a rich resume. And if you were to look at the whole thing, of course, this is a PowerPoint, right? So I had to split up the pages. But if you were to scan this and take the 2.5 seconds, you would see a solid, substantive executive who's got keywords and solid stories, real stories, okay? Not just a metric. The things that she's done that have added value to the organization. And again, all of these labels are customizable. So imagine a couple of pages, even 3 pages, by the way, no problem doing 3 pages these days. No problem whatsoever. We don't care. Recruiters are fine. The only time you can really go longer than that is if it's the government, which is looking for every time you tied your shoelace. Okay, that's a whole other format. Go to Corliss Jackson for that. Or academia, they also want multiple pages. But normal private sector companies, 3 pages, perfectly fine, as long as they're substantive and they matter. They make sense. Okay, so I'm going to give you.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Yep, sure.
On keywords, if you are a computer is scanning, I understand because the computer can just, you set it for looking for certain words and it can do it in seconds. But for the human eye, you want keywords to pop out. So you go underline, bold.
Wes, I'm so
italicized.
sorry. I'm not hearing you fully. Can you maybe go closer to the mic?
How about now?
A little better.
I've got a problem with that. I just said that with a computer, it can pick up keywords fairly easily, but with the human eye, for the keywords to pop out to catch the attention, I guess you're gonna want to bold, italicized.
Wes, I'm so sorry. I keep losing you in the second part of your thing. I think you're saying that the ATS can pick up the keywords, but the human eye maybe not as much with this format.
Yeah, so how do you,
No,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. Actually, this is exactly why I designed it this way, okay? Because in the human eye goes for the bolded keywords. It's not going for the lead board through actionable. No, it's overlooking that. What it's looking at is strategic planning, public relations, crisis management, and fundraising. That's the 2.5 second scan that I'm talking about. And thank you, Wes, for bringing this up, because this is literally the point of this format specifically, okay? If you were to see this document for real, like the full thing, what you would see is, and you can literally scan down in the 2.5 seconds, you'd see the nonprofit association executive, right? You have these keywords here. And then as the eye scans down, boom, 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 skill, 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 skill. My eye is not reading these long paragraphs. My eye is scanning for these keywords that hopefully are customized to the job. And if I screen this person in, she's going to go in what I call my A pile. And then before an interview or later on, I can read, oh, okay, let me actually see what she wrote, right? All this is doing is allowing me to make a quick yes. Bing, bing, bing. I just want to put my A people in the A pile. So this actually is written for the eyeball because of the bold label. If this was not bolded, it wouldn't be scannable. So I guess I have to define what I mean by scannable. There's ATS scannable, and then there's eyeball scannable. ATS scannable doesn't care if it's bolded or not. They just want to know that the keywords are in there. Eyeball scannable is all about the formatting. It's me looking quickly and saying, okay, right here, top of the page, nonprofit association executive, got it. I don't need a summary. I can quickly see that this resume is framed like an advertising document. Here's what she is. Here are a few little key competencies around. I'm looking down the key skills because they're bolded skills. And I can quickly say yes. That's eyeballs, because I'm a human being and my eye is going to look for things that are bolded. A computer doesn't care about bold. They just want the words. Is this making sense, Wes?
absolutely, thanks.
Okay. You're welcome. Karen?
Sure, we have a question in the chat,
Oh,
which is
thank you. I can't actually see the chat.
which
so-
is really interesting. JB wanted to know, how do you balance the requirement to list the specific star stories with
Yeah.
confidentiality? If your last 2 jobs were governed by NDAs and much of the work was before that was with the military, which was classified,
Yeah.
what do you do?
I know that's a little bit tricky. I can't deny that. That's not easy. And I can't give obviously specifics, right? Because I don't know your situation. But what I would say is anything that you can do to sanitize the story. I'll give you an example. I've had people who, let's say they were in business for themselves. I'm giving you an analogy here, okay? Let's say the person was in business for themselves and they had a bunch of clients. And they wanted to share the story of the work they did with their clients, but they didn't want to reveal the name of the client. So they would say an environmental nonprofit, a Fortune 500, completely sanitized. So what you could potentially do something like that. Take the real story, but strip it of any nomenclature that's going to give away the military operation, anything. You can just say something in the Middle East or whatever, things that are, I don't even know if you can do that, but anything that is a euphemism for what you actually did. Certainly not the alphabet soup stuff, can't do that. But if it's euphemistic, it might be okay. And then just to be safe, I would screen it with somebody who's in the military, maybe a former employer, and say, is this acceptable? right? Am I out of bounds here? Just for a little protection, okay? But again, euphemisms are typically what you want to do when it's a sensitive situation. Okay. Karen?
Hi, just a quick question. So these bullets, do any bullets get you in trouble? I would just like think, ooh, that is a problem bullet, but apparently it's not. Can any type of bullet get you in trouble?
Do you mean the physical bullet and with the ATS, like the actual little diamond thing that I'm using? What do you
Yeah,
mean
the
by that?
diamond thing. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't believe so. My understanding with ATS is that they are very bullet friendly. But it is, but
Okay.
I did read in that one article, they would prefer apparently like a traditional, like a square or a circle. So this particular one with the little 4 diamonds might get you in trouble. So when in doubt, go standard little dots. But that's a great question, Karen.
Okay. Thank you for a great answer.
Sure. All right, let's keep going. All right, so here is another one, okay? Another executive. Now I'm showing you this in part, and not just because they're my clients, it happens to be people I work with a lot, but to show you that I don't care who you are, whether you're president of a company or anybody, right? Nobody really knows how to do these things. These are normal people who write normal resumes and don't know. Why would they know? Why would any of you know what's going on in the mind of a recruiter? It's why you have somebody like me educating you. These are regular people. There's nothing wrong with this resume other than it could be enhanced. Okay, so I'm showing you real people here. So I want you to look at this, okay? And now tell me, this is a whole different kind of resume. What works? What doesn't? Open up your line. What's working? What's not?
Typeset is too small.
Typeset too small. Okay. I think What else?
I'm used to seeing the job dates over on your right-hand
Right.
side,
Yeah.
and I don't want to read all those paragraphs.
Yep. What else?
Yeah, Debbie's right. It all flows into, it doesn't, the stuff that you want to stand out doesn't really stand
Doesn't
out.
really stand out. Sort of just kind of mushed. Even though she says the selected accomplishments with a few bullets, there's nothing drawing me in. I can't scan this.
I get
I-
lost in all of the committees.
Right. Lots and lots of stuff. All right. Okay. So here's what we turned it into. All right. Same thing. This is the same format, right? This is just my standard format. So now you're seeing the commonality here. So senior GR executive. Remember here is this at the top. We just went right for it. Boom. Senior GR person. She's a DEI champion. And oh, I should also mention you, this is going to be a little bit different. Notice I said DEI champion. She's an interesting person because she's an individual who not only is a lobbyist, like this is a major association she works for, but she also has a very strong DEI lens. In fact, did a lot of work in the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion space. She's actually looking for a job that blends both. That's why we put DEI champion up front. And there's something you're going to see on page 2 that's going to highlight that even more to indicate to an employer, I'm not just a traditional lobbyist. I really want to work for these diversity causes. So what we did was here, we split it up. Legislative accomplishments and DEI related, which there's more here than I could put on the slide. Okay. So it's a branding kind of a thing that has to do with where she's going. So it is where she's been, but it's all about where she's going. What's the thing about a resume is that it's not only about, yes, you got to meet the requirements of the job and all that, but your resume should be future directed. When I did my coaching with her, I had to pull this out of her. This wasn't just like an obvious thing. We had to really have a deep conversation about what is her trajectory. And it came out in the coaching that indeed she's really a dual person, which means the brand of the resume should have a dual focus, not just a laundry list of, you would never get, right, from this, that she's has anything to do with DEI at all, 0.
Mm-mm.
It's not branded toward where she's going. So this is, and it's still customizable, right? But at least now when she's sending this to her network now knows that she's got this dual focus. Make sense? All right, third one. Another person, okay? Also executive, right? Page 1. And I didn't do actually the whole thing. I just did page 1 and then I think I did page 1 and I did like bottom of page 2 or page, 2 and 3. All right. So again, I know, right? You're Debbie and Kristen, you're like, you're squinting your eyes like, okay, what's
Too much,
Too
too
much.
much.
Too much.
I
Are
mean-
you sure this was not a, this is a resume and not a college syllabus? 'Cause that's, yeah.
Right.
Well, and if you go back to that first page, Shira, it tells me, okay, that, where was it? Track record of partnering, but okay, so
Right.
what'd you
And-
do?
Right.
Proven ability to work in high pressure. Well, how'd you
And-
do that? I mean, what, there's no specifics.
No specifics, right? And then there's some little specifics here. Okay, I have little one-liners. But remember too, this is an executive. I'm just saying, does this look like a resume of an executive? No, other than the titles and these big hunkin' paragraphs, right? I can't even get through it. I don't even know what to look at. All right, so here's what we did. All right. And so now we have solid substantive accomplishments that are like, you see the pattern here. Now it's streamlined. Okay, so the eye can go whoosh, right down the page. I've got the keywords that needed to be highlighted up here. I have some real stories. Okay. And again, there's more pages than this too.
Shira,
If I wanted
somebody
to-
asked if you had this template, or is this one you made up, or is it available?
This is proprietary to me. I actually, if the next question is this available to folks? So I'm happy to share it here, but because this is my business, you hope you can appreciate this is something I work on with my clients, but you're certainly welcome to take a screenshot of it if you want the concept of it. But no, this is something that I made up.
I just saw a question in chat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very normal question. Yeah. But it's the idea of this. Focus on your brand, focus on the keywords, make this scannable, have decent sized accomplishments, but make sure that they're labeled. I will share with you, I know there's some folks on this call that might be looking at this and saying, I'm not an executive. I don't have these fancy, accomplishment stories. That's okay. First of all, they don't have to be 3-4 lines. They don't at all. And they don't have to be really substantive, but no matter who you are, even if you have only job duties, if that's all you can do. In fact, there's somebody I'm working with who's an executive assistant, right? She's not going to have accomplishment stories. She's going to talk about scheduling and this, but label it. Whatever the line is that you have, even if it's 1 line or 2 lines of a job duty, make sure that it has the bold label. Because I did this for a recent grad. But yes, you can do this for anybody. It doesn't have to be an executive. But the bolded label concept helps tremendously. In fact, I want to give you one more example of a career changer I did this for. He was an attorney who wanted to become a recovering attorney, if you know what I mean. Wanted to get out of Dodge. Yeah. And we figured out in the first coaching session, what did he want to do? He wanted to be a writer. Huh? How do you turn an attorney into a writer? Well, we did it. I went through his resume and I found all the different examples of his writing work. Attorneys do a lot of writing. This kind of writing and that kind of writing and this kind of report and that kind of brief and da 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 da. And then in LinkedIn, we took the about section and we crafted into this whole story around the kind of writing he likes and why he likes to write, style, blah, 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 blah. He got a job as a journalist with a legal trade publication. Shifted his lane, but kept the community. A legal trade publication said, this guy's an attorney, he gets what we do. But he wants to be a writer, he wants to go from ing to cool. And that became his profession. But it started with the customization of the resume and the customization of the LinkedIn. All right, is this making sense? That's what, and the other thing I wanted to show you here, she's a seasoned person, as you might imagine. So we have this prior experience section. For those of you who are trying to avoid age discrimination, notice what is missing here on purpose.
Dates.
Dates, no dates, and no dates. No dates here and no dates on education. Okay, we just go back up to, I forget where it was. Well, it's earlier than 2016, but anyway, prior experience, no dates. All right, now I'm going to go through some FAQs and then we're going to wrap up. So can my resume be more than 2 pages? I hear that all the time. I mentioned earlier, yes, it can. 3 pages is fine, right? Those other industries can be longer. How to avoid age discrimination? Actually, I just answered that too, right? So take off the dates everywhere you can. Now, should I list all of my certifications, awards, publications, memberships, volunteer experience, blah, 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 blah? Yes and no. It all depends. If you have a lot of that stuff, try to curtail it. Don't give me a full page of it. And try to make it relevant to the role that you are looking at, either the industry or the lane. But I will give you one example where I made a big exception here. So I was coaching with somebody who is in the he's like in the emergency management FEMA kind of world, but he was known as a local Northern Virginia government guy. Okay? He worked for the Northern, like Fairfax, some county government. But not only that, he wanted to indicate to people that he's really part of the Northern Virginia community. Like he's very, very dedicated to it. As it turns out, I'm not even kidding you, this guy has a page of all of the volunteer experience he has from the Boys and Girls Clubs, Farmers Market, everybody, like 20 different things. I made an exception for him to actually list it all, and we put it in categories, actually. I don't know, it was like youth related and business related and this and this and that, because he was trying, his brand was focusing in on, I am deeply embedded in the Northern Virginia community and I want to stay in the Northern Virginia nonprofits or business or whatever. That was very specific, but normally I would not suggest a full page of it unless you're in academia and you've got a CV, right? Not a resume, a CV, and you've got all the publications and presentations. That's different. If you're a subject matter expert, you're even in the private sector, let's say you're in the STEM field, you're scientists or that, and you want to have all your publications and presentations, that's fine. But for most people who are just regular private sector, I would say list them, but try to make sure that they are relevant to the job or to the community that you're with. What if you have a long employment gap? Okay, so I was addressing that a little bit earlier. You can put reason, like reason for leaving your last job, and you can actually have that thing, as I mentioned. I think I put it here. Ah, yes, I did. That's the guy. So see, I put here elder care twice, just to let people know that he had a 3-year gap once, and then a couple 3-year gap again, just to let people know that there's a legitimate reason for him being, not working. Now, I will say that there are some folks on this call who've been unemployed for a long time. Very normal. I mean, that's people are unemployed for all kinds of reasons. And so you can, if you needed to, you could say job transition, okay, for a certain period, that's all right. But I will suggest that if you have done anything else during that time, if you've volunteered, if you've done part-time work, anything like that, it's really, really helpful to list that on your resume just to account for the time that you've been job searching. But again, even so, even if you haven't been, you've just been looking for a job for a long time, you could put job transition 20 whatever to present. It's okay. But it's good to sort of just account for the time. That's all. Because people are going to question it. What have you been doing? I've been in job transition. I've been caring for a family member. I've been volunteering. I've been whatever. Okay? What if my employer was acquired? How do I list that? I get that question sometimes. Or anything around the merger kind of a thing. What you don't have to do is list the different companies. So let's say I'm gonna use my own banking story. Okay. So I happen to bank with Truist. Well, back 100 years ago, it was called Citizens Bank of Maryland. It got acquired by Crestar, got acquired by SunTrust, and then it got acquired by Truist. Now, let's just say those were my employers. I would not actually necessarily have to list all 4 employers. I could say Truist, and I could say, the different titles, and I could just, in small print, a little asterisk, I could say Crestar acquired by SunTrust. Just a little note, a footnote. But at the end of the day, my employment history is all going to be under Truist because my employment records went with me. You can list it once and make a little mention of it, somewhere discreet, just to let people know, by the way, there was an acquisition. Okay, because it could be part of your story. But you don't have to say Truist and Crest. Why? Because then it can actually break up your tenures a little too much. Because it'll look like you have multiple jobs, but actually it was one company, it just kept getting acquired. And same thing with government contractors, that kind of thing, right? So you can either list, by the way, this is a different thing. If you have a government contractor, you could list the name of the contractor as the employer, or you could flip it. You could put the name of the agency as the employer, and then in small print say a government contract under Lockheed Martin. It just depends on what you're trying to emphasize. If you're trying to emphasize the agency because, I don't know, maybe you worked for a USDA and you're an agriculture kind of Aggie, or as they say, an agriculture person, and you really wanted to make sure that people knew, ooh, you're in the ag space or health space, you work for HHS or something, list the government agency, just list also who your official employer was. Or flip it. If you really want to try to emphasize that you're a GovCon person, put Lockheed, put Boeing, put whatever. And then, oh, by the way, I was on contract to USAID. Okay. Karen?
Yeah, going back to the avoiding age discrimination by not putting on any dates, isn't it disorienting for the person that's reading it? First question, and then second question, is it maybe an acceptable approach to like group, like a decade or something with several, I work on projects. I'm not employed by, to kind of group them in a decade or some in some way.
So two things. First of all, to answer your first question, no, it's not discombobulating. I don't know the word you use, confusing for an employer not to see dates, but I'm not talking about taking dates off your whole resume. Only what we call the prior experience, the early things. So let me reframe this. Your resume dates should go back about 15 to 20 years, no more than 20. Anything prior to 20 should go under a stack. If, by the way, you even want to put it, you don't have to have a prior experience section. You could just stop your resume 20 years, no problem. But if you choose to go farther, then I would have prior experience and don't put the dates there. Yes, it does indicate that you have more than 20 years experience, but it doesn't say how much, all right? And that's not confusing for the employer. They get it, all right? But you don't have to put prior experience. You could just cut it off at 20 and that's it. The only time that the prior experience can be helpful is if the jobs you held during that time are relevant to your story. For example, this woman, the one with the executive, where I think you might have seen, she worked for, if I put it there, she worked for the White House, right? Early in her career. Well, that's an important part of her story. She likes to let people know she worked for the White House. Okay, it's a DC thing, right? But if it wasn't, if she was working for some nondescript organizations that didn't really add to her story, she could have just taken it off.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Yeah.
And then how do you frame that? You say just prior experience or?
Yeah, just prior experience and then company title, dates. You could put a little description if you want, but I just normally do company title, no dates.
Okay, thank you.
As far as your other question around the groupings, so I don't know your specific situation, right? Here's what I will say. Recruiters, employers, number one, they're looking for chronology. That's how they read resumes. It's not about decades or functional skills. Like, by the way, functional resumes, very passe. I would not recommend them under any circumstances. Employers just don't know what to do with them because but that's not your question, Karen, but just as a sidebar, if you have a functional resume that basically just says, like on the first page, here's the skill and here's an accomplishment, here's the skill and here's the accomplishment, and then you just list your work history as a tiny little section, employers don't know what to do with it because they don't know where you accomplished what.
Mm-hmm.
They want to see chronology and then your skills underneath that. That's why the template that I showed you is so powerful, because it's what's called a hybrid. It's a hybrid chronological functional. It is a chronological resume, but it has the functional skills embedded in. That's, by the way. But to your question, have you been self-employed? Is that what it is when you say you do projects?
I do organizational change management, so I'm just on contracts,
You're on different contracts. Okay. Which is fine. But you have an employment, you have an employment history. You have company X and it's short-term projects, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you can actually, instead of just saying work history or employment history, you can say contracting experience. If that's been the majority of your work, you can say contracting experience. It's been for the last 10 years, just like normal jobs, company X, title Y, with your little, your description, your accomplishment stories. Or you can say employment history, right? A regular title, employment history, company X, title Y, and in parentheses next to the title, contract role. So then the employer understands why it's short tenure, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it was. contract, 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 contract. So it's not about grouping it by the decade. It's trying to explain that job and minimizing the risk of the employer. Like, oh, why was she only there 6 months? Because it was a contract. So it's company X, title Y, in parens, contract role.
Thank you.
That's all you need to do. Pretty simple. Okay, other questions?
Yeah, sure. I have a couple. I'll make them real quick because I don't want to monopolize time. But just real quick I noticed on the resumes they're all black and white. And I know LinkedIn that's totally different. So do you recommend just keeping it black and white, or because I know ATS doesn't care about color, but
Yeah, I don't believe they care about color. And it's funny that you said that. I've very recently taken to doing a little bit of pop of color. And the pop of color that I do is I'll take the name of the person. This is just because of the format that I happen to use. I'll take the name of the person and then the career headline, or the career headline and the text box, and turn into just those lines into dark blue, not light blue, but dark blue. Just pops just a little bit. Okay. A lot of ways to do these things. I'm not saying that you should or should not do it, but if there is something that you want to highlight kind of at the top, you can. I wouldn't do red. I wouldn't do green. Dark blue tends to be a nice version of that. I don't believe that the ATS is going to be averse to it, but on the other hand, I wouldn't take a chance. So you want to be as clean and sanitized as you can with the ATS version, and also turn it into a plain text. Okay.
I'm sorry. So you're saying, so you make a separate ATS in print formats?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Other question was, I'm sorry. The other question was, you mentioned a while back during the gaps, you mentioned like if you have a medical thing, and you mentioned a word that stuck out. You said discrimination. I have heard both sides. I've heard, well, I know by law they can't ask you about medical issues, but is that something? How would you handle that? Say if you've gone through cardiac rehabilitation or something like that,
You wouldn't. Let me give you a very real example. All right. Many years ago, I had a candidate. Now, this is at a time I was working for an agency and I had colleagues. So we were a bunch of recruiters working in the same office. And we were bound by certain HR recruiting ethics. Okay. So here was the story. Candidate disclosed, she just chose to disclose to me as her recruiter that she had had 2 brain aneurysms in her past. Okay. Gone through rehab, all this stuff. She was perfectly fine, but she had them. Don't ask me why she told me that. She told me that. I knew that I couldn't even tell my colleague, my recruiter colleague, that she had gone through this. She gets the job. She then, once she got the job, going through her benefits and HR stuff, then she disclosed to the employer, hey, by the way, the employer called my recruiter colleague and said, did you know about this? And my colleague, bless her heart, she goes, even if I had known about it, I wouldn't be allowed to tell you. Okay. And they had to handle it. So there are laws that protect people from discrimination. However, human beings are human beings. They can think all kinds of things. Just because they're not supposed to discriminate doesn't mean they won't. And that's why it is recommended that you not share. Of course, it's your prerogative. Wes, if you want to share that, you are welcome to share it. However, it is not recommended that you do that because human beings are funny, right? We think all kinds of things if we don't want to think. Once you share, you can't unshare it. Okay.
right. And I mean, I have no problem mentioning medical, but I'm not going to tell them my issue or whatever. That's just, but you got to account for that time. So what do you just say?
I see.
Medical?
I see. No, that's where I would say something like, family sabbatical or, family care, something like that, because you are your own family. So you would not say in the description, I had a something, but cared for ill family member from time X to time Y. That's all I would do. That's all I would do. You're accounting for the time, but you're protecting yourself. That's up to you though. I mean, if you want to say, again, nothing preventing you from, but please understand that even though they're not supposed to discriminate, they might, just because people think all kinds of things, and they might say, oh, I wonder if he's okay now. And I wonder if our benefits are going to go up because he has a pre-existing condition. I mean, you never know what people are going to think. So that's why it's recommended not to share. But again, you are certainly welcome to if you feel that you want to.
So if you have those EEO and it says, yes, I've had blah, blah, blah. No, I haven't, or I don't want to, reveal which one, or do you just not respond at all? How do you handle that?
I mean, again, that's a very personal choice. If you want to click on do not reveal, all those EEO questions are optional because they're trying to check boxes for demographic purposes, especially these days with DEI. So you don't have to answer any of those things if you don't want to, race, ethnicity, any of those things or whatever.
So just don't even respond to the email.
If you don't want to, you don't have to.
But if they insist, what's the best of the three? What is the, if you have something, you had it like years ago, it's all done.
Choose not to reveal. Choose not to reveal is going to be your safest one.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay.
Okay.
I do have one more box down at the bottom here that I wanted to address.
Okay, go ahead.
And then we can go to any more questions. So what if I don't know my exact career path? Can I apply to different types of jobs to keep my options open? So I get this one a lot. The folks say, well, I just want to keep my options open. I want to apply to all kinds of things. The more generalized you are, the less the employer feels safe about that. It's kind of like people like to hire specialists rather than generalists. Think if you have a leaky faucet, you're likely to call the plumber rather than the general handyman. Employers are the same way. They really would prefer to see somebody who's focused on a particular profession and or a particular industry. Now, is that a very intentional decision? You betcha. Does that take a lot of thought work? You betcha. Might you want to work with a career coach like myself? Sure. Or anyone else. But even if you don't work with a career coach, have a trusted friend, somebody who doesn't have a dog in the hunt, right? Not a family member, not your best friend, but somebody who's objective in your life, who can coach you through how to focus in. Now, when I say focus in, I don't necessarily mean that it has to be niche, but it's something that what I call a broadly narrow brand. What does that mean? A broadly narrow brand means it has some sort of definition, but it has some flexibility to it. I'll give you an example. So for myself, I'm self-employed. Well, in my recruiting world, I have a particular community, as you can see, the association community. I work with other people too. I really do. I work with all kinds of folks from all kinds of professions. But I do have a focus in the association world, particularly as a recruiter. But for those of you on the call who know the association community, there are lots of different kinds of associations, medical, trade associations, this and that. I don't specifically say I only work for medical associations. No, I say I'm an association recruiter. It's narrow in the sense that it has some definition to it. People can kind of wrap their hands around it, but it's elastic, it's flexible. I do a lot of different things within that association world. So even if you wanted to be broad about it and say it's education or environment or whatever it is, something that has some kind of parameters that allows your colleagues, your network, that allows an employer to say, oh, okay, they're in my sphere. I get it. They're part of my community, my family. But there's some elasticity on the kinds of roles maybe that you're looking for, or vice versa. Maybe you're a marketer, okay, or marketing communications, and you've got a general kind of concept. But you know what? You're open to something that is more media focused or more digitally marketing. You've got some flexibility, but there's something that kind of is like a red ribbon around your brand. Okay, so I highly, highly recommend that you talk with somebody to help you get some kind of definition. And part of that is for your network. Your network is not going to know what kind of jobs to refer to you if you're all over the place. If you're kind of saying, I'll do kind of anything, then they're like, well, I don't even know. Then that's nothing to them because they don't understand where to act. Like, what should I refer to you, an accounting job or a customer service job? Or try to have some sort of definition to help your network refer the best kinds of opportunities. Okay, so that's my recommendation. There you go. So the answer to those questions. Other questions that are in the chat or people want to just raise their hand?
I think we've taken care of all of them.
Great. All right. So keep in touch then. So feel free to screenshot here if you'd like to reach out, say hello, connect with me on LinkedIn. But if you do connect with me on LinkedIn, please mention CNM because I'm almost at the max of my limit of LinkedIn connections, which is 30,000. So I have to be very careful. Yeah, that I have to be careful of, and I did that on purpose because I am a recruiter, so I want as many people as possible. That also means that it's helpful to just kind of know, where the person comes from. But feel
Shira, do
free-
you still do your masterminds on Friday mornings?
I do. So this is a free service. Thank you, Debbie. So I have two free programs for you. One for job seekers and one for the self-employed, which I mentioned is BoomerWorks. I'll tell you about that one in a second. But for job seekers like yourself, every Friday morning from 9:15 to 10:15, I have an open Q&A. So it's different than this. So the CNM format is a presenter, right? We go deep into one topic. The Friday morning group, which I call Higher Moment Mastermind, I'm going to put it in the chat real quick. Give me a second here. We meet for an hour and it's an open Q&A. It's myself and another coaching colleague. Give me 1 second. We're on Meetup. And yeah, it's really any job search question you have. Anything from resumes to interviewing to networking to anything. And we answer your questions for an hour. And then at the end, for those of you who want to stay on the call, I do offer a short prayer call. But you're certainly welcome anytime. And then for BoomerWorks, as Debbie mentioned, it is a community service program. And we offer monthly educational programs. I'll share the site with you real fast. For those of you who are even considering self-employment, every month we have a program. And so you can go to our Meetup tab right here for our upcoming events. And so we have what's coming up in April, but then we have I'm booked all the way out through December. Okay, all kinds of aspects of self-employment. And then we also have a training center. So we've recorded it, almost everything. And if you go to the training center tab and drop down to any one of these tabs, you'll see the videos for these presentations. And at your leisure, they're like an hour and a half long on all aspects, right? So even if you just want to conceptualize your business, we have one of those, Intro to Self-Employment. I did a radio interview once, and then you'll see here all kinds of folks talking about, how to get into self-employment. Okay. So thank you for mentioning that, Debbie. Just want to offer some free resources.
Wanted to let everybody know. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've gone a little bit over, but Shira just has a wealth of knowledge, and I learned a lot myself. But anyway, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming, and thank Shira. And let's just close in a quick moment of prayer if we can. Dear Lord, thank you for this time together. And especially thank you for Shira, who has graciously shared her knowledge with us. Watch over us as we virtually depart. Give us the strength that we need to face our job search. Give us confidence when we doubt. Give us hope when we despair. And give us peace when we worry. We ask these things in the name of your precious Son, Jesus Christ.
Hallelujah.
Amen.
Amen.
So